Hello, everyone. I'm excited, Janine, from Coping Skills Kids. For kids. We were just speaking, Janine, and we're both from Massachusetts. We both worked at the same school. We have a lot in common. And I thought, let's start recording because I want everybody else to hear this conversation. So we were just saying how difficult schools are right now to work in, right? I was just saying, quite honestly, it only takes a few children to derail a teacher's life, a school
Mhm.
counselor's life. You're coming from a school counseling background, right? Um, a classroom or a school. And so this topic, when I was looking at your website, coping skills, we talk a lot in our yoga and mindfulness world about, being centered and calming strategies, but I also love your approach from the mental capacity of how do we cope? Because remember when we were young, Janine? I mean, life, like, I'll be honest, I grew up in the middle of Canada on a farm. Okay. Like, you can't get more idyllic than that. Okay. And I think about my daily life was going outside and playing with my brother on the farm. You know, now my 13-year-old, she has been through and seen more than I have an entire life.
Yeah.
So this is why I wanted to have a chat with you about hearing your expertise on how do we help these children. And it runs the whole spectrum. And we're not talking about it doesn't, these coping things don't discriminate, right? It goes across the spectrum of economic diversity, cultural diversity, additional needs diversity. It's everywhere. This is something that we have to face, right? So to get started, thank you so much for being here, Janine. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I would love you to tell us a little bit more about your background, your passion, and what your work is up to now.
Oh, sure. Okay. So it's so funny that we actually had worked in the literal same school. Like, I think that's hilarious, actually. And I think it's interesting because I started coping skills for kids about 10 years ago, which is hard to believe. I actually was just realizing that timing. And it came out of actually the things that I was doing as a professional. So I was a school counselor for years. I worked in a lot of different districts in Massachusetts, and I did community mental health. I did social skills groups, those sorts of things. And I was really driven and I really wanted to help kids figure out what are the strategies that help them cope. And it all came back to like
Mm,
finishing up graduate school and having like three strategies and then
mm,
feeling really super confident and super excited and walking into a school. And then I had used all the three strategies I had learned in graduate school, like within 45 minutes. And then kids are still throwing chairs, kids are still crying, because like, and I'm like, oh gosh, we're gonna need to up my game with the coping strategies, right? So over time, like in all those different professional places, I actually was finding different strategies that worked for kids, seeing what actually worked for the kids that I was working with, but also hearing from my other colleagues, like, oh, this is something that really helped. This is like really good information, reading, research, that kind of thing. And it was actually the principal of that fourth and fifth grade school who really sparked this coping skills thing for me because he's like, what do you want to do for all the kids
mm.
in the school? What's your goal?
Yeah.
What's your desire? And I was like, and I sat for a second and I was like, I want every kid to figure out what strategies are going to work for them when they are having big feelings. Every single kid, doesn't
Yeah.
matter where they are, who they are, what
Yeah.
socioeconomic status they're coming from, what's their
Yeah.
background, if they have any sort of things that are going on additionally. Every kid needs to learn how to use strategies. Every kid needs strategies, especially going up to, we're coming in from our like little home in fourth and fifth grade and going up to middle school, right? I want you to learn your strategies. So I am actually always like super thankful and grateful to him because he asked me that question. And it was part of like
Yeah.
just the things that you have to do as a principal, but it really helped spark me. And I really love doing that. I do that in my work right now with my private clients, helping them find their strategies, what works for them. It's so interesting, you can have, one kid in a family and these strategies work, and then you talk to another kid in the family and they're not going to work for that child, right? So you have
Love
to
it.
know what's going to work for where, for who, and for where. So I started Coping Skills for Kids. I wrote the Coping Skills for Kids workbook. I created card decks because people needed visuals. So it sort of all grew organically, and it's still like on this, I feel like I'm on this sort of road that you never know where it's going to lead. So here we are.
I love it. I love this so much. My heart is bursting. I love so much that you're talking about there isn't a one size fits all in terms of choosing a strategy,
Yep.
right? And that's something I've seen with my own daughter as well. And also, I want to say too, not just children, but adults,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And so I'm mindful about when we're talking in our world of yoga and mindfulness that some of these strategies don't work for everyone. So it's always about what works for you. What lights you up? What have you noticed, right? And there's a need for introspection and finding the quiet space and time to think about and notice what's working. So getting curious, right? I love this so very much. So you're not coming on here saying, here's a list of 5 strategies, pick one and do it. Because that's
Right.
not, you're right. And that's what I'm just bursting because I'm definitely, it's one of the things I've noticed with my daughter that has been missing. She hasn't found her thing yet. And if she had someone like you when she was younger to be her guide along that journey, oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. I love
Well,
this.
and it's so fascinating to watch kids realize and come to that sort of like internal, like, this is what works for me. It's so
Yeah.
cool. It's such a cool experience to be there and to be sort of helping lead them in that way, to be like, oh, well, if that doesn't work for you, let's try something else. And that's really what the Coping Skills for
Mm,
Kids workbook was, like, just a whole bunch of strategies that give you just ideas to spark you to figure out what is going to actually work for me in the moments when I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling sad.
yeah. Oh, I love this so much. So how do you go about getting buy-in from some of these students who are having these big behaviors that you're talking about? And we hear like they're reluctant to learn, they're resistant, right? They're dysregulated.
Yep.
How do we help them even begin the conversation of choosing a coping strategy?
Oh, absolutely. So, first of all, I like to get a little bit silly. I love using play as a method of introducing anything. So, when I work with clients in a one-on-one setting, I play games. I play Jenga and I write questions on my Jenga. And so, we're playing Jenga and we're actually getting to talk about each other and know what about each other. We're talking about feelings, we're talking about strategies in a playful manner. So, I like to use play as much as possible. It's the way that kids learn, and it's fun to be able to just like connect over a game like Connect Four or Shuttles, like I'm going to play this afternoon, and then have the conversation, start a conversation. I also always try a skill with a child, because it feels sort of weird when you're sitting in a room and you ask
Mm,
them to do like a deep breathing strategy or a movement strategy and you're like watching. That's weird, right? Like, it just feels awkward. So I do it with
yeah.
them, or I demonstrate and I make myself a little bit of a goofball and I say, like, I might look a little silly, but I want to try this and see if it's something that might work for you. And it's always putting it on it in the ball is in their court. Is this
Yeah.
something that's going to work for you? Does it feel good for you? Does it work? Does that breathing technique work for you? Do you like that movement idea? And it really is under helping them understand themselves, so because they live with themselves for their entire lives, like, it's them, right? You're the only one who lives with you your entire life, so they have
Right.
to help learn. They need a little bit of strategies and a little bit of support to figure out what works for them. So I love to be silly, I love to use play. And sometimes, if a kid comes in like super escalated, I like
Mm,
using like cold temperature. So I will have them have a cold drink of water. I will have them run cold water, run their hands under cold water. I might put like a cool compress on the back of, help them put a cool compress on the back of their neck. Like, here's a cool paper towel that has cool water on it, put it on the back of your neck, to really get them actually like a little bit less dysregulated, so we can actually have a conversation.
huh. Can you say more about that? That's really interesting. I haven't heard a cold sensory because
Oh,
some of your kiddos might be having a reaction to the sensory part of being cold, no?
well, so here's the thing. When I talked with a few OTs in my life, like my occupational therapists, I've interviewed actually a couple on my podcast, and they talk about the impact that cool and cold can have on the vagus nerve, which is, really helping
Mm.
get your nervous system out of that fight, flight, or freeze back down to rest and digest. And it's again, you have to be aware because some kids are really much more sensitive to the cold, so you have to be like really careful about that knowing their like medical history.
Mm.
Some kids can't manage that, but some kids can. And so if I know that a kid doesn't have any medical things where temperature is going to be a complication, and I usually knew those things as a school counselor, like I knew the medical stuff before a kid came in, even if like I always had like all the information about the child, even if I hadn't ever actually met them in person, and I could always like look it up. And if I knew that they didn't have any sort of medical thing, I'd be like, here, have a cold drink of water. Here, why don't you go to the bathroom and just run your hands under cold water just for a minute for me? And then let's come out and let's have a conversation.
Right.
It can really help calm their nervous system, which is really
Mm.
like a cool thing. And it's not obviously my area of expertise, but I have interviewed experts who have that background and
Yeah, yeah,
information.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
really cool to hear from them. Like, oh, this is again just gathering strategies from my colleagues, multidisciplinary, like what
yeah.
is working.
I love it. And I love too what you're speaking about with the buy-in. It reminds me that like I think about, doing all those things, being silly and creative and that, and I don't know that that has really necessarily worked for me as a parent. I think,
Mm,
I think my daughter doesn't want to be seen in that way, but then I hear her school counselor makes more inroads and then we went to occupational therapy. So I think there's a piece where even as a parent, as a teacher, as a school counselor, you have to read the room with a child, right? And meet them where they're at. And sometimes admit that it might not just be you that's making that impact with them, right? So thinking about what are sort of your three top tips for teaching these creative coping skills that's sort of simple, effective, and doesn't take extra time, because when you're talking about in school counseling you've got that child often in a one-on-one session, but
yeah.
what happens when you're in a larger group in a classroom, for example?
Yeah, so I like to just in general, when I'm teaching coping skills, I always practice when a child is calm. Always, always,
Mm.
always. I introduce it when they're calm because when they're in the midst of like starting to escalate, they're not able to hear you. As one of my little ones says, my brain is off, Janine. When it's not working. I tell my parents my brain is off, my brain is
Yeah.
off. It's not on. So I cannot hear you when I'm already starting to escalate. So that's not a teachable moment. I wait
Mhm.
until the teachable moment is ready, when they are calm, when they are ready to learn. So I always practice when they're calm. And I try to keep it as playful as possible, right? Like you always want to, and doing it again together with a child. I think that piece of like, not letting them feel like they're in the spotlight is very vulnerable when you feel like you're in
Yes,
the light,
right.
right? Like,
Yes.
but if you're like I would introduce mindfulness, like eating a piece of chocolate with one of my teen clients, and we would eat it together and then we would have a conversation about it afterwards, right? Like so it's we're doing it
Yes.
together, we're experiencing it together. We can be like, "Ooh, that was great," or "Ooh, that wasn't so great," and just really have it sparks a conversation. And then the other thing I would say is really if you're dealing with big feelings, making a plan can be so helpful. So like you're absolutely trying to create a plan for what's going to happen when that issue comes up again. If you know that you feel anxious about tests on Monday and you have the Sunday worries, what are you going to do on that Sunday? What's the plan? Are you going to make sure that you do something fun? Are you going to watch a TV show as a distraction? Are you going to read a book? Are you going to crochet? Like, what are the things that you're going to do? And then not only do you make a plan, but then you check in afterwards. Like, what worked?
Mhm.
What didn't work? And trying to do it from a very neutral, sort of like I'm curious sort of perspective versus like, oh, that you didn't do it right, so let's try something else. Like, no, it's just we're all human. We're trying to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. So what worked? What did you like? What did you not like? And how can we do something differently the next time?
I love this because it feels holistic. So
Mm.
I'm not hearing you say, here's what I do with my, children with autism. Here's what I do with my children with ADHD. Here's what I do with, ODD or whatever. You're looking at the child as whole and complete,
Yep.
taking away the diagnoses in that moment, all the letters, whatever, and you're just meeting them where they're at and looking at how do we be successful in life? How do you find a coping strategy that's going to work for you so you can reach your own potential, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that is, diagnoses can be super helpful. They can help you get coverage for insurance. They can help you get support that you need. But really, when it comes down to it, they're a kid. They're a kid who has a lot, they're more than just their diagnoses. They're a kid who loves video games. They're a kid who loves soccer. They're a kid who loves to go out and run. They're a kid who loves D&D, right? So there's lots
Mm,
of different things that we tend to sometimes focus, I think, so much on like what isn't going well. And I love to be
yes.
able to go from the strengths-based approach. What does work for you? And that's actually where I start a lot of times with coping is like, what do you like to do? What are you into? Tell me the video
Yes.
games you play. Tell me the books that you like to read. Tell me the YouTubers you like to watch. Because that gives me an insight into who the child is, what they love, and what might help them when they have big feelings.
Yeah. Oh, I so love that. Yes, it definitely, like you talked about earlier about getting the buy-in. I think for some of the population and my daughter and these kids I've worked with is there's a sense of there's something wrong with me,
Right.
right? Because I know I don't fit in. I
Yep.
don't fit the mold. I don't look like other kids in the class, right? I have these big behaviors and like what Dr. Ross Green said, they do well if they can.
Yep.
We all do well if we can, and we're doing the best that we can.
Yes.
So how do we, yeah, how do we help these children to change that script about
Yeah.
themselves, that they aren't enough, that their behaviors are wrong, their feelings are invalid, right? How do we help them change that?
So I do a lot of work around like I was actually just talking about this with another school counselor. I do a lot of talking about like the brain, everybody's brain is different, right? Like, and
Mm,
you have some, everybody has things that they're good at and things that they could be better at, right? Or things that they're not so good at. And everybody's profile looks different. I'm really good at
mm,
some things, but I'm not really good at others, right? And you're really good at some things and you're not really good at others. And that's okay. It's what are you good at, and how can we build on that to make it so that you are able to do some amazing things in the world? And I will talk about how people with differently wired brains can make some amazing um, insights that I wouldn't be able to necessarily see, right? So I've watched this documentary called The Disruptors, all about kids and teens and families and adults with ADHD, right?
oh, wow.
It is an incredible documentary. It's intense, it's powerful. But what I love about it is actually Ned Hollowell's in it, and he talks about how the characteristics of ADHD and how the name is terrible, number one. And when we
Mm,
think about the characteristics, you can think about it in a negative light, or you can flip it on its head. And you can think
yeah.
about those things as positives and ways that you can think creatively outside the box, create more things. And they list all these people and interview all these famous people who have the diagnosis of ADHD and are doing incredible things and creating things that would not exist in this world if we did not have them. And that's what I love to be able to tell kids. I write social stories about it for them, specifically for what is going on for them and their profiles, right? So that
Mm,
like you, just because you have like a label, a diagnosis, doesn't mean that you can't do incredible things. It is just a cluster of
mm,
information. That's all it is. It gives us a little bit of insight. It does not say who you are.
right. Oh, it's bringing up for me, Janine, that, there's an opportunity for us to celebrate again our differences. I feel like the last few years have been so challenging and we're trying to cope by putting everybody into the same track, right? And so we're not allowing ourselves to see the differences again. And I see this in schools. The teachers are trying so incredibly hard. They're working way too many hours. They're way undervalued and underpaid. And I feel like looking at the system now where we are here, I don't know if it's everywhere across the country, but compared to when I used to work at private schools, for example, under this, American private schools, was I had so much more freedom and flexibility and creativity. Then I still had the curriculum, but I had a more of a voice. I could be myself also. And I feel like what I'm seeing, this is my own personal antidote, right? That I'm seeing that teachers don't have that flexibility because they're so burnt out. They don't have that creativity. So in not being able to celebrate who each teacher is, we're
Yeah.
not helping to celebrate each child. Does that make sense to you? Are you seeing that?
I absolutely do. So my parents are both educators, my mom especially. And so over the year, and this again, this is anecdotally, right? So over the years, having watched her be a kindergarten and first grade teacher from the time I was in like middle school until the time I had a child, which is a fair amount of time, that the art of teaching became sort of
Mm.
like more, you have to do it this way versus like I remember my fourth and fifth grade teacher who was so creative and cool and really saw each of us and like really highlighted our strengths and helped us figure out where we could improve ourselves and did it in such a loving and kind and supportive way. And the art of teaching, it really is. I'm worried about those teachers who went into the field because it allowed for this creativity where you could look for the spark in a kid and you could do the things that you needed to do in order to support them. And now it's not like that anymore because you have to teach to this curriculum and you have to do this and you have to get all this stuff
Mhm.
done. And it loses the magic of it and
Yes.
the spark that you can bring to it, which I
Right.
think is vital.
Right. I'm so glad you said that because it's been something that's been on my heart for a long while. And I haven't felt the courage to say anything because I don't want to offend or I don't want to say the wrong thing or, it's difficult. Right. And so I appreciate you seeing me and validating that it's not just me feeling that way. And, that's a conversation for another time. But so, looking at stories, Janine, we love stories here at Kids Yoga Stories. So tell us a story about, as you work as a counselor, how, how did you help a child discover their own coping mechanism and or strategy and what was it?
Oh, sure. So, I use like a checklist to help kids. I actually do have like this pretty substantial checklist that I use with kids. But there's one when I was thinking about this, there's one particular boy who he was going on a plane trip to Disney World, right? So super exciting. Like he's like so pumped. He's wanted to go to Disney World his entire life. He's like ready to do it, right? But he is scared. He is so anxious about the plane ride itself. He is
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I want to go to Disney World. And he's like, I do want to go to Disney World, but I don't want to go on a plane. Can we drive instead? And we're in Massachusetts. That's too far of a drive. Like people do it. But like
Right.
for a school vacation to drive to Disney World and to drive back and you got too little anyway, it's not going to work, right? Your parents already bought plane tickets. You're getting on a plane, buddy. Um, so what are we going to do? So I really actually talked through with him like what is making you anxious about the plane? What is it in particular? So we were able to actually figure out that the thing that was making him most anxious was the waiting in the airport.
Mm.
And then a little like take off a little bit. So we actually tackled those two areas. So it's really like how, and by this time I had known him for a while, so I had an idea that that was potentially what was going on, like that downtime when you're waiting. and your brain is spinning. So we tried a technique I call rainbow grounding. So it's really helping you stay focused in the present moment, and you're using the colors of the rainbow and you're looking around to find those colors in the environment where
Yes.
you are. So look for two things that are red, look for two things that are
Yeah.
orange, two things that are yellow,
Oh my gosh.
things that are green, two things that are blue, two things that are purple. Take a slow breath in and out, and do it again if you need to. And when you're at the airport, you're going to find all those colors, right? Like
Yes.
you can just look. And so he's like, that really super. We came back. He did go to Disney World on a plane.
Yeah.
He
I
did it.
love it.
He's like, that really worked, Janine. I was in the airport and I found all
Oh
these
my
things.
goodness.
And I was like, yes. Is the plane his favorite place? Absolutely not. But he will get on a plane now.
Yes, I love that. I used to do that with a classroom actually as a transition, the rainbow. And we used to say, what, no, what is, who can see, I spy something red, I spy something orange, whatever. So that's a great one to get the class on the same page and focus
Yes.
as well. So I love that. Great. And so what, while we're finishing up together today, what advice do you have for educators and caregivers, right, who are struggling with how to co-regulate with a
Mm,
child who has these big behaviors? I've got a couple in mind in the school I was working at. They really ran the classroom and the school. So how do you co-regulate when you yourself are feeling exhausted,
yes.
depleted, dysregulated, all of it? How do you go about, how do you build yourself up to be able to co-regulate?
So I would say the thing that you need to do is you need to have good self-care hygiene. And it
Mm,
is one of those things where it feels like it is unnecessary. It feels like it is the last thing that you want to do. It is, you don't have any time, you don't have any energy, and it doesn't seem like it really is important. And I am here to say it really is. It really is vital and necessary. Not only so that you can be able to go out and do the things that you want to do, like be able to go into a classroom the next day, be able to take care of your family, take care of your
mm,
loved ones, but also because you deserve it. You're a person who needs to be able to do the things that you love, that spark you, that bring you joy. You should have some of those moments in your life. It shouldn't be all about like what is other things that are going on. And so, in order for you to be able to show up in your life the way that you want to, make sure that you are also taking care of you. So, I'm
yeah.
actually, it's funny, I'm working on a book right now for adults, all about coping
Awesome.
skills, because it's one of those things that it's so easy to put it off to the side and to say, I don't need it. It's not important. I am not going to put myself on my own list. And I have found in interviews with other people, they have said as soon as I sort of like waver in my own self-care, it makes it harder for me to then be able to go out and do the things I need to do. I'm in a worse mood. I'm not like, so it's really about your own self-care hygiene and what does that look like? And sometimes it might
Mm,
be only a couple minutes, and sometimes it might be a couple hours, and every once in a while it might be a couple days. But to make sure that you have a plan and that you honor yourself in doing those things is
mm.
super valuable. And there's other things we can talk about in terms of like how do you handle a classroom, how do you manage that big picture stuff. But when it comes down to it, the things that you can control are how you treat yourself and the ways that you are caring for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I think back to your point about choosing your own coping strategy that works for you. And it may not be the same as you go along, right? I had a situation a couple years ago where, grief and teaching clashed. And I just really hit rock bottom. And in those moments, I had to choose a different strategy that I hadn't, like all my meditation, yoga, exercise, eating well, all these, drinking water, and all the things weren't enough. And
Yep.
so sometimes, to give a nod to your work, sometimes you need to speak to somebody, a therapist or a counselor, or you need to get medication, speak to your doctor, or, say alter your entire schedule so you have no social things, whatever, just for some time, whatever it is. So it because your self-care comes to your mind like having a bath, sometimes having a bath is not enough, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I think that I just wanted to bring that up too, is coming that I love your whole philosophy about there isn't a one size fits all. We need to really look after ourselves at a deeper level. I love all
Yeah.
that.
And it changes through your lifetime and through the season where you're at and through
Mm,
whatever's going on and whatever you're feeling. Sometimes one is not enough. Sometimes, I ran into when COVID hit, a lot of my strategies were like going when I'm not like a super extroverted person, but I found like a couple of communities that I felt really good in. And so that was my strategy. And then suddenly those were gone. And I was like, oh no, like what do I do now? So you have to like
right.
have like an ability to be flexible and think about, okay, what are the strategies that I can use now? I need some ideas, I need some sparks. I need to think differently about what is going to work for me in this season that is going to be effective and try it and be okay
Mm,
with like, okay, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to just be open to it and see if that works for you. I found new strategies. I'm doing well.
that's awesome. That's so amazing. So how do we connect with you online and sort of what's next for you?
Oh, sure. So I'm at copingskillsforkids.com. So that's where I have I have a bunch of free resources, downloads that people can get. I also run a community hub. So that's really where I spend the majority of my time creating new resources, putting together a fun summit that I'm going to be doing in a few months. And then also, I am in the midst of writing a new book that should come out in 2026, I believe,
That's
all about
amazing.
coping skills for adults. I'm really excited about it. I'm really
That's
excited.
amazing. Oh, it's just been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I can't wait to share this chat with our community. Thank you so much, Janine.
Thank you.